Did you notice that in her one little moment where she bothered to have a poetry reading in her book, she took the opportunity to shit on metrical poetry? It all sounds insufferable. There are like 20 people, and there's the first two rows of seats are all empty, and everybody is writing poems on a theme of crisis. It all sounds terrible. But then she slips in there. A young man in glasses recited poetry so abstract and prosodic that no relationship to the theme of crisis became clear. What? Why prosodic? What did that come from? What does that have to do with being unclear? What? And then she says, while the final reader, a woman in a long black dress, talked for 10 minutes about the difficulties of finding a publisher and only had time to read one poem, which was a rhyming sonnet. Well, okay, first of all, rhyming sonnet. But secondly, so what? Why was that? And therefore it's bad? God damn it.
You know, I agree. But I mean, she is a fiction writer. What do they know?
I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you are listening to Slee Ricketts. I'm here with Echo, who's feeling skittish tonight, so she needed to keep me company. I wanted to thank you all for listening, and thank you especially to those of you who have taken a chance to recommend the show to somebody you think might like it. Please do, if you have not yet had a chance, please do just tell someone you know that they might like this ridiculous podcast we're doing. I do really appreciate you spreading the word. That's mostly how we've been gaining new listeners. I've heard from a lot of people who either were told about the show one-on-one or who told someone else about it one-on-one. And that's not only the most effective way of gaining new listeners, it's also the way I think I prefer, because Echo is licking the mic. No, baby, come on. Because it's closest to the way people learn about good poems, at least in my experience, the way they learn about good poems that they tend actually to read and like. So again, thank you all for that. I am speaking today with Traci O'Day. She's come back for a second visit. She is a poet. She's the author of Restricted Movement, as well as the brand new Waving, now out from Ashur Press. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that, but it's a terrific book. We talk about that, but mostly we talk about Sally Rooney's sex scenes. So it's a pretty juicy conversation. Traci is charming and insightful as always. And Echo, come on, baby, come on. No. Just have to knock the fucking mic over. Baby, just calm down. Get you a turkey bite in a minute. So anyway, I hope you enjoy that conversation. Let's go to that right now.
So I read Normal People first, probably about 3 years ago, in a book club. Well, it was just three of us. And the other two girls were millennials, and one was from Dublin. And their reaction to the book was so much more powerful than mine. Like, they were like, oh my God. I mean, like, people say she's the voice of, a generation. And they definitely agreed with that. And they felt like, oh my God, I know every character in this book. I feel like I've been there. And I sort of rolled my eyes at them. Like, are you kidding? Like, the first time I read Normal People, I was just like, this is shit. She is like giving women a bad name. She's like representing women as submissive, and like that's like how women get off. And I know it's one character, but this character is now being like representing an entire generation. So I was pissed off. But then I'm talking more to these girls, and they also were telling me that, like, when the Spice Girls came out, how important that was to their generation, because they were seeing it was like girl power, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm sorry, you just have a completely different point of reference in life than I do. If you think the Spice Girls were actually something good for feminism, and that's where you're coming from by saying that this Sally Rooney novel is also like speaks to you and is resonant and speaks for you. If you thought the Spice Girls spoke for you,
yeah,
I'm really worried.
That's a harsh comparison. Like, I mean, I think Sally Rooney a good deal more seriously than I take the Spice Girls. Like, my recollection of that when I was in fourth or fifth grade when that came out, like the girls in my class liked those songs and would say girl power a lot, but like that was about the extent of it. I think, which is like a fine response if you're a fourth grader or fifth grader and it's a catchy song. But yeah, I didn't. What I'm curious because I'm at the upper end of millennials. What was going on with them? How old were they? Like,
I guess they're probably 35.
So they would have been like little kids when the Spice Girls came out.
Yeah, and they were their role models.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I guess Wonder Woman was like my role model.
Sure.
Wonder Woman and Cher were two of my like favorite.
Yeah, I mean, but in both cases, like there's just a little more dynamic. There's a little more going on with Cher and Wonder Woman.
Yes, because they weren't like created by a machine.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that comparison.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going completely out there. But
it seems like
you always get me at like midnight. So
no, I know.
Like, who knows where I'm gonna go?
Yeah. So you really disliked Normal People partly because the main character in that. And there was one of the articles you sent talks about Marianne is the main character in that, and she is a sexual submissive in a kind of in a specific sense, like not just kind of in a vague general sense, but like she adopts sort of a BDSM, like that's part of her MO with sex. Is that right?
So not always. So she has this really sort of special sexual relationship with the main character, Connell, and that is her first sexual relationship. And that it sort of is described as it transcends any sort of kink or any preference. It's very present and very real. So the sex with them is beyond that. But then when she has sex with anyone else, she needs to be hit or tied up, or, treated like shit. And that, whatever stems from her childhood of abuse from her brother and neglect from her mother. And then she eventually asks Connell to hit her as well. And he's like, I don't want to do that. And then she feels like she's a freak. And I don't know. It's portrayed in a way that for me, like I said earlier, if she is being this character is like representing all of these college kids from Dublin and this whole generation, then I was just sort of annoyed by her. She's very, very much like, well, whatever you want to do, well, whatever makes you happy. Well, I just want to make you happy. Like all of that bullshit, which obviously makes me so angry. And so that's where my conflict comes in. Like, I'm like, you're writing this character and I want this character to be like, have some revelation or be stronger or something. But I mean, I understand that that's me putting my shit onto this character, but also that's why I didn't like her being representative of this generation.
Right. So it was maybe if you had encountered that in a vacuum, it would have seemed more just like a book about a particular young woman. But in this case, you encountered it in the context of having these people say, we're just like her. She represents us. So that was worrisome.
Right. It was very worrisome to me.
All right. But then what? Where did you go from?
So then I watched the BBC program Normal People, which is better than the book.
Okay.
Because the actors are phenomenal. And acting is very important to me. I go to the theater a lot. I watch films. Acting decides a film for me. And it can be really well acted and sort of shit, and I'm happy with it. Or it can be really great but badly acted, and I can't watch it. So it was so beautifully acted and beautifully directed. I mean, the whole film was stunning. The whole series was stunning. So then I revisited the book. And the actors who played the main characters, Marianne and Connell, made the book better for me because they were more complex than actually the characters in the book itself.
Okay.
So then I because I loved the series so much, then I was like, well, I'm going to read the other books. I'm going to give the other books a chance. So I read Conversations with Friends. And then when the new one came out, I mean, at this point, I'm just like, well, I'm just going to read her. So
you're in it. Yeah. Whether
I'm
you
in.
yeah.
I'm in. I'm going to read her and I can hate her, but I'm not going to hate her. I don't hate her. Like you said, it's incredibly readable.
Yeah. Yeah.
You keep
Total
turning the
pleasure to read.
page. Like she is a very good writer.
In Conversations with Friends, your impression of that after having come to terms with normal people, how did that strike you?
Well, I had the same issues with the submissive. So now all of her characters are basically women who sit around asking men, well, what do you want me to do? I'll do whatever makes you happy. And then they also, I thought that in Beautiful World, Where Are You? They also are completely incapable of communicating with each other. And that was true in normal people as well.
The,
Like,
the men and women.
yes, the
Yeah.
men and women. Not, though the women can communicate with each other beautifully, the men and women are incapable of communicating with each other. And it felt like like if it were Victorian times, I would understand because you're like if it's an English Victorian novel and you're extremely reserved, I can like feel that tension and be like, oh, poor them. They were victims of their society. But I'm just like, why are you guys unable to communicate with each other? Like I was really invested in these characters and I had a hard time sort of separating, which I normally am quite good at. But I think that I really got into these characters and couldn't really see them as creations, except for thinking about her like, well, you've just done a shitty job of writing every single one of your characters being these submissive women.
It's like Woody Allen always writing Woody Allen characters. So in Beautiful World, Where Are You? I did, because I remember you wrote something about how you were sort of frustrated with the sex. And there are, in a, not a terribly long novel, there are like 7 or 8 distinct sex scenes, I think, in this book. All of them are Alice having sex with Felix or Eileen having sex with Simon again and again. And I'll say, like, they're fun to read. Like, they're sort of titillating. They're like, I was interested. I mean, and partly there's the truism about literature that everything is about sex except sex, which is about power. In this case, I don't know. I mean, like, it seems partly there was certainly some power, and there's some like literal kind of like, I want you to tell me what to do, daddy, kind of stuff. But a lot of it felt like it was just sort of like there to be like a fun sex scene to read. The women do seem to be really, really passive. I mean, honestly, like, even when Eileen began to play into the daddy thing, that it felt even just a little bit more assertive. Like, okay, well, you're playing a role. You have an actor, like, there's a jump in and do something, do that. They do, for the most part, sort of allow the men to do things to them. And even I think say at one point, like, the most exciting thing for me is like seeing you be excited to get what you want. Yeah, to be held in his arms and to feel him move inside her, this man who kept himself apart from everyone, to feel him giving in, taking comfort in her. That was her whole idea of sexuality. So yeah, I mean, these are, whether or not these women represent all young Dublin millennial ladies or not, there does seem to be a type. Like, they do seem to be kind of the. I mean, I did kind of wonder about Alice and Eileen, who are old college buddies. And there's some jokey talk about their differences, but the main difference seems to be that Alice is a very successful novelist, and Eileen is like a small time literary magazine editor who occasionally will write an article. It almost felt like they were the same character on either side of, like, if you had been successful or not.
Yes. Can you please tell me how someone is getting paid to be a literary magazine editor? Like, is that a job that people get paid for? Because I've been doing it for like.
You get paid so little. It's like,
I've been doing that for 19 years. I've never gotten paid for it.
Right. No, exactly. Like, I mean, Yeah, there was definitely some. I mean, maybe that's one of those things where again I thought like, is this Sally Rooney being out of touch, or is it different in Ireland? Like it's
That's what I was wondering. I was like, well, I know that Ireland really appreciates like their poets and their writers, so maybe
they do have
actually
like really good theater
maybe they
subsidies. I
do
know.
pay people who work at literary magazines.
Yeah, I mean, because she was working for the magazine, and that seemed she was like, oh, I don't make any money. I have to live with roommates, but like she could live on it. Like she
Right.
could live on what she made
There was
working as an editor of a
pay.
small literary magazine, which is fucking insane. And if so, like I hope I wish that were the case. I hope if that is how it works in Dublin, then great. You know, I mean
Maybe I
Dublin
need to move to Dublin.
that was, and there is a like a lot of the book is dedicated to Alice's angst over her success and Eileen's angst over her lack of success or lack of like certainty about what success should be. So one of the articles you sent me is largely an interview with Rooney.
Yeah.
It's in the Guardian. It was Emma Brock's for this article. The title here is Sally Rooney on the Hell of Fame. It doesn't seem to work in any real way for anyone. I'll say, like, as a standoffish, prickly person, holy shit, she's prickly and standoffish. Like, wow. Well, I mean, I'm really I'm pretty impressed.
I'll take your standoffish and prickly and raise you.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
God. Yeah, she goes on a rant about how dishonest writers are when they write novels that seek to obscure the reality of life as a successful novelist. They come home from their weekend in Berlin, and then they write this little beautifully absurd novel about real life. And then she goes on to say people don't like to be reminded that novelists are necessary for the production of the novels they like to read. Isn't that odd? Almost like attending a football game and complaining that everyone on the pitch is a professional footballer. Their job is to play football, not to reflect your life experiences. Furthermore, she says, it's not my job to populate my books with particular types of characters that I imagine other people might find relatable. It's my job to write about whatever comes into my head to the best of my ability. If as a reader you want to exercise control over the kinds of things that are depicted in novels, try writing one. That's what I did, and it worked for me. If on the other hand, you just don't want to read novels about writers or women or Irish people, whatever, that's okay. What do you make of that set of claims?
I think she's lying. I think because she's someone who has had success so early and without having to fight for it, I think that she has the privilege of saying these things. Also, she's basically saying, I don't need an audience, which is a lie.
Right. And it does seem like there's some weird straw manning in here. Like their job is to play football, not to reflect your life experiences. Like that's fine for football, but like aren't novels about like everyone's life experiences? Like isn't there? It's not quite the same thing with a novel. And like, yeah, you don't need to cater to every reader, but also like, well, if you just write about what comes into your head, like I'm not sure that makes it for a good novel. Like it doesn't seem to be exactly what you're doing either.
No, because then later she says that she wanted to write a story about these two women characters, these two friends, and then she wanted to write about how they were both in these relationships. Like, I mean, she's obviously constructing something and for a reason. And it's not just for herself to see how it plays out, because that's just a lie. I think she definitely is aware of her audience. I found this article definitely, well, I mean, prickly, yes, and off-putting, and also for like when she makes these claims about fame. So, you know, she says, I can't believe that anyone would ever want to be famous. Like, that's horrible. She talks about the hell of fame, yeah, etc. But that's because she got this instant fame and success and is now able to make a career out of doing what she loves. And like what she doesn't understand is that a lot of the people these days who are seeking fame per se, like people who are using Instagram as a tool to like writers who are using Instagram as a tool. Like there are plenty of poets that I follow on Instagram, and they're using it in order to gain readers because they did not get success at a young age when they were in their 20s, or they did not get this sort of instant acclaim that she got. And they might be just as talented as she is. I don't think she's complaining about fame, but she's not complaining about the money.
She does complain about not being considered working class, and she makes a sort of a fine and probably correct distinction that there is a meaningful difference between making money from your investments and making money by working, and that even somebody who makes a lot of money for working is still making money by working. But it seems like there's like a two sort of irritating sides of an argument about being qualified to write about Marxism or being qualified to write about the working class, which just made me think, like, who are these people and why would anyone listen to them? like how about is the book good? But yeah, I mean, I think what I definitely noticed that is something I've seen in other interviews with people who were very successful early on, notably Edward Albee, who is terrible about this, is that she identifies what sets her apart as talent. That she refers to it as
right.
It seems to me a big sacrifice on their part. So somebody who's famous for doing something and doesn't like fame could stop doing whatever it is they're good at in order to be allowed to retire from public life. But that seems to me like a big sacrifice on their part and an exercise in cultural self-destruction for the rest of us, forcing talented people either to endure hell or keep their talents to themselves. And I think, well, that's not, I mean, she is talented, but that's not what makes the difference.
No.
Like, that's often perpendicular to what makes the difference. Like, that you're talented and successful is, not totally a coincidence, but is like sort of a coincidence.
Yes.
Yeah, no, Edward Albee was asked once, because he was adopted by a millionaire as a baby. And he was born into a poor family. He was adopted by a millionaire. And he was asked once, like, well, what if you hadn't been adopted by a millionaire and you'd been raised by a poor family in the same city? How do you think that would have affected your career? And he said, not at all.
Right.
Be exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that is, and that, she's a little bit like prematurely world weary the way some of her characters are, which is fine. There was another article you sent that I was sort of baffled by. It's in the Oxford Blue. The title is "Normal People Don't Do It Like That." It's by Amy Sankey, and I don't want to beat up on it too much because she is, I think, still an Oxford student. But I was bewildered by this article. I mean, first, like, the title doesn't. I mean, I'm sure she didn't write the headline, but the headline doesn't seem to correspond to the article. And then the article itself, I had a hard time making sense of. So it seemed like there was partly your argument about I wish it were not just a bunch of submissive women having sex in all these sex scenes.
But then it wasn't.
Right. No. Yeah. So yeah. What was your response to this strange?
Yes. So the reason I chose this was just to sort of kick off, the conversation about the submissive women. But I didn't agree with this article at all, and it kept saying things about how women overthink everything. Like, well, it's like it was a fact, like that women overthink sex. Where so it happens more than once in this article. Let me see if I can find it. It's possible I'm reading far too much into this, but to be honest, that's typical of how women view sex and our own sexuality. We overthink it, and like I was like, what? For girls, it's generally much harder for it to be just shagging, and I guess I was
that came from like this bizarre passage that I loved because it was so funny and unfair. That she said, I talked to some of my friends in the process of writing this article. It was noticeable that the girls I asked practically wrote me essays, whereas the boys' response is best summarized by a quote, "It's just shagging, innit?" But she didn't say what she asked.
No.
Well, what was that the answer to? What were the girls writing essays to? And what did the boys say? What, in answer to what? Maybe it is just shagging. What was your question?
Exactly.
She seemed to want the women to be more like the men in that. Like, she seemed to want the women to say it's just shagging. Or it seemed like there were some very irritating people in her life who were saying to her. I wish them like This is almost like the literary equivalent of like a pearl that like forms around an irritant. That I wasn't sure where it was going exactly, and it seemed like maybe the Sally Rooney book was like what was the occasion of this article rather than the subject of it.
Yes, good point.
Yeah, but there's the maybe like if there is an argument that's sort of present here, it does seem to be that like in a book, when a character has a kink or something like that, there's an almost it's almost demanded by the art form that have some meaning or correspondence to something, like that it's almost crucial that reveals something about her, and that like Sally Rooney builds up this past that kind of leads to it. But of course, in real life, often a cigar is just a cigar, and
right.
I do think that is true for a lot of things in literature, whether it's like an addiction or a tragedy, or any of the different ways in which the gods can strike you with a lightning bolt. Because it is a narrative, it has to be imbued with meaning. But in life, often it really doesn't have meaning. And so I do wonder sometimes about how one could write about some of these things without distorting them by turning them into, effectively into a kind of a quiet morality tale.
I think like John Irwin once said in a workshop that, and he was just really critical of details that someone was including in a poem. It might have been me, it might have been someone else, but he was and I took this lesson away from me. It was very much just like, this is a poem. This is only like 14, 18 lines long. You only have so many words. So you have to make sure that every word is in there for a reason. Like, I don't care if there really was a penguin on that like playground. Like, there has to be a reason for that penguin to be there, because you chose to put it in there. So if you're choosing to put it in there as a writer, what he said was it needs to be in there for a reason, or it should be in there for a reason, and not just because, oh, but that's what it really was, because you're not taking a photograph. You're choosing one thing out of an infinity of things to talk about. So that one thing should have a purpose, or maybe not should, but it does, whether you give it one or not. Once it's on that page, it does have a purpose. So you have to be conscious of that and aware. And it's also like, the loaded gun. If there's a loaded gun on the wall, like, it has to go off. I mean, it's these are sort of things that as a writer, you have to know. So I guess the point is, if you're going to have kinky sex, what this writer is saying in this article in the Oxford Blue is, well, there needs to be a reason for it. And she's saying, if it were happening to a dude, would there be reason to it? But I don't know. Like, I don't know if I've read any novels where a dude is necessarily has a particular sexual predilection, and whether or not it's explained. I can't think of any examples.
I feel like most fictional depictions of men with like a sexual kink are serial killer stories.
Right. The first I think of is Patrick Bateman. So, I mean, obviously, I can't think of anyone else.
Ray Fiennes and Red Dragon, or like what's his name, and Wild Bill and the Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. Right.
That's a whole other can of worms.
Back to what you said before about her sex scenes, and that they were enjoyable to read, and I totally agree with you, because they were incredibly realistic moments in them, where they didn't feel like there was necessarily, it was just like, oh, this is the fumblings of any people having sex for like the third time. Like, this is where it starts getting sort of interesting, and you feel open enough to ask questions and to talk about it. So, I mean, I liked the realism of it. And I think that's what made it enjoyable, that it wasn't fantasized at all. Except then of course my skin would crawl as soon as she starts asking, like, what do you want me to do? But I mean, I guess if I were reading a book and a guy said, what do you want me to do? And do you like that? I want to please you. Then I would be like, yay for him. But when it's a girl asking it, I'm like, fuck you, bitch. Like, he should be pleasing you.
See, yeah, you're really, really going after the right target. Yeah, no, I mean, I think part of what I enjoyed about them is that they are, and part of this may be may have to do with the passivity of the female characters, who are the main characters. We follow Simon and Felix a little bit, but mostly the characters we're really concerned with, even in the narrative sections, which have a really bizarre, there's a really weird literary quality that I do want to talk about in a second, that most of the chapters in this book have. But we're mostly watching them. We're mostly following the story through their eyes, and they are so passive. Part of what that achieves in the sex scenes is suspense, because, and the other thing is that she writes very snappy dialogue throughout the book. A lot of her, she even refers to her fictional character writing snappy dialogue, and like the jokes in the dialogue were like much of the point of or pleasure of the book. And that's certainly, she does that effectively here. The sex scenes are really talky. Like they do, there's a lot of like talking through what they're doing. And that, and the passivity creates a sort of like it felt like almost every single one of them was a sort of striptease. Like everything was sort of done step by step. And so just in terms of like creating readerly pleasure and suspense, that's fun. It was almost like like in a heist movie or like a police procedural, there's like the action is broken down into these little discrete quantums, and it did or quanta, and it felt like that with sex. These were like sexual quanta, like step by step, and now he touches the breast, and now she unzips the pant, so like it's fun to read. Again, I don't know what it adds up to, but like it's hard to write 350 entertaining pages. So all right, so the really weird thing that she does, and I as I said, I have not read her first two books, so I don't know if this is something they have in common, but up to chapter 23, I believe chapter 23 is when it breaks. I think almost always up until then, alternating a narrative chapter with an epistolary chapter, and of course it's right around then that they meet up, and so they stop needing to write letters to each other, and then the very end of the book is another letter. But up till then, in the narrative chapters, she writes with an almost, it's not even like a journalistic objectivity, it's like a security camera objectivity, where she doesn't, you're following the characters, but it's neither first person, nor is it even really close third, because you don't hear the thoughts. And even when people have little facial expressions or little gestures, she always is careful to include as if thinking this, where he seemed to be waiting for this, but it's like she never intrudes on what the characters are actually thinking. So it's a really weird effect. I mean, like part of what makes it not like it's like if it were a few degrees further, it really would be like it rubs the lotion on its skin. But I think it's partly because it has so much of it is just like unattributed funny dialogue that feels more like you're sort of immersed in a scene. But then any description of action is like really has this really odd objective mode, and I don't know what that is. Once you get to chapter 23, for some reason you suddenly get like tons of memories. You get to like, you spill into these people's minds and you see their childhoods, and like you kind of wash from one mind to another, and it just gets a lot messier after that. But up till then, it really is like, unless I missed it, she's pretty scrupulous about keeping us outside everybody's skulls, so that it's like it's literally a fly on the wall, but not a fly inside the mind. What why? I don't know. Like I couldn't make heads or tail. Like I don't know. Did she do that in the other books?
Yeah.
What
And it's
that?
extremely effective. I mean, you're asking why, but I mean, it kept you reading, and it could be another sort of example of like some sort of like withholding in order to increase tension and in order to make it suspenseful, and never really knowing what the characters are thinking, but just getting hints at it and seeing it from, like you said, security camera perspective is a very good description. I'm thinking specifically of the scene of when Felix is in the car and he's rolling a joint, and like that's what came to mind as soon as you mentioned that. It's very much like telling, it's showing and not telling. So you're 100% seeing everything, but not hearing anything inside the character's head.
Right.
And I think that does add to the mystery of the characters. And maybe that's why they're intriguing to us. Maybe because we're actually giving them more of an internal life than they deserve. And then they end up being, we end up projecting like maybe our own inner life onto these characters. Therefore, they become more human and well rounded, but not because of anything Sally Rooney is giving us of their internal monologue.
Maybe. I mean, it certainly felt like it had almost the quality of like a scrupulous fairness. It was almost like
Yep.
she wasn't making any assumptions at
Not
all.
judging.
She wasn't judging. She was almost like waiting for consent to enter their brains. Like it felt like decorous or correct in this sort of odd way. I mean, I don't know if it's just that I'm not a hip young Dublin millennial, but I was interested in all of these characters, and I found some of them in in alternating scenes kind of more or less sympathetic, and I liked listening to them and I liked following them along. I didn't relate to any of them, and I didn't feel like recruited into the perspective of any of them in any way, male or female. And even though there were passages where like Alice in particular had some rants that I very much agreed with, but I always, in a way, like maybe partly because of that description, I always felt very much relegated to the house. I was not on stage at all. Like I was watching from a distance from my seat, and it was a good show. But if I think about novels where I've been really swept away, whether it's a character whose life is much like mine or not, I get caught up in them, and I think that's part of it. Is like I was interested in all these characters and I was interested in what happened to them, but I don't know that I will be haunted by any of them. And that may be just because I'm not, maybe Sally Rooney would tell me to go fuck myself, and then maybe I should, but I don't know. I mean, it is, as you said, it's very effective. And it actually makes sense to me that you say that the TV series was better, assuming normal people had some of the same quality. It felt a little bit like a line drawing. Like there was plenty of detail and there was interesting figure and shapes and development, but it was not saturated.
Right.
I mean, almost like the way a play or a screenplay needs to be
acted,
needs to meet with these other flesh and blood elements in order to create a world, in order to really create life. It felt like maybe these are meant to achieve their full potential as adaptations.
No, I totally see what you're saying, and I think that makes perfect sense. It was like they had a paintbrush applied to them. They came to life once they were on the screen. And just like I said earlier, like it made the characters so much more real and less cardboard. I mean, they definitely do feel cardboard sometimes. And I know exactly what you mean about reading novels and when you are 100% with the character. And like, I don't care if it's Harry Potter or Proust. Like I have been like with these characters 100%. And I did not feel that way with any of Sally Rooney's characters. It definitely felt like I was watching them and she's not judging them, but I was judging them the whole time.
I mean, and I think my primary, like the if it were a movie and I were shouting things at the screen, the things I would have shouted in most cases were like, communicate better with each other.
Exactly.
No, she's not trying to break up. Just hold on a minute, slow down, like stop being jerks to each other. Listen. Yeah, it did. It was, I mean, not like that you do get that feeling a little bit that they were they were as excluded from each other's minds as we were.
Yes.
Even like, I mean, I found it like almost shocking at the end when there is finally sort of a blow up between Alice and Eileen. You have been kind of wondering the whole fucking book why Alice, who's rich as shit and is living in this big rented house, keeps waiting for Eileen to come visit her.
Right.
And like, finally, like when she does come visit, she's like, you know, this was really expensive. Like, you know, I had to pay like for a ticket and this, and like take time off work to do this. And Alice never goes to visit her. But then it's even worse than that. Like she like blew Eileen off while she was in Dublin. Like she really has been an incredibly negligent friend and seems totally incapable of like even digesting that fact when she's confronted with it directly. And it really did make me want them just to like give each other the tiniest benefit of the doubt at any scene.
Yep.
So there was this article, I probably should have sent it to you, though I have mixed feelings about it. And it felt very much like it had an agenda of its own. But there's the Stephen Marsh article a while ago about, he really was pretty unfair to Sally Rooney, where he said, I'll send it to you now. You can read it after the fact, and probably be mad at the way I was. Like he was pretty unfair to her. He 100% equates her with her character in the novel, which is understandable, but like really not quite fair. And even if you read a tiny bit about her life, it's like, well, she's been married for a while, and like, this really isn't quite accurate. But he makes this big claim that Generation X novelists were novelists of the voice, and millennial novelists are novelists of the pose. And I don't know that there's any truth to that. And I also don't know if that, like, based on his description, if like the voice is better than the pose. But
right.
What does seem to be the case is that her novels are not driven along by it doesn't seem to me to be like a really powerful tornado of a voice that drives her novels along. There is I don't know that pose is fair, but it does seem to be almost like tableaus or transcripts or like a carefully choreographed series of maneuvers. But you don't have a, sing muse of the Wrath of Achilles. You don't have like a big world swallowing voice that drives its way through the whole novel. I mean, even the letters they're witty and they have a perspective to them, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like voice is quite a defining quality for her. I don't know. What did you make of that?
I mean, I think it goes back to what you were saying before. I think there's just such a detachment that the idea of voice is your own sort of originality, your own sort of your stamp on things, I guess, but also, I guess, an eloquence or I don't even know how to talk about like go ahead.
You have to be presumptuous.
Yeah.
You have to you can't do it without a little bit of arrogance.
Yes.
She is prickly and presumptuous in her interviews, but in her book she seems very pointedly not to be.
I see what you're saying. And I do. I mean, I am calling that detachment, and I think that that's more of what it is.
Yeah.
Just observing from not really afar, but not inside.
All right. Can I ask like a dumb version of this question that I think probably is like probably the wrong way to go, but it is coming to mind. Like she's really, really worried in this article, this interview, and like in a couple of interviews I've heard her give, like she does have a preoccupation with the fact that she grew up working class. Her parents were working class. She became a really big, famous, rich novelist at a very young age. And, people have given her grief for being out of touch. And there seems to be like I won't try to psychoanalyze her, but at least in two of the novels, it's a posh girl with a working class guy.
Right.
And so there is there's certainly some tension about work and about, like what you have the freedom to do during your day and the nature of your work and what's fair and what's not fair. That is a preoccupation. it makes me wonder a little bit about. So I sent you the Alan Shapiro essay about identity, and that's a whole question. But like, I know the refrains of our cultural moment that drive him crazy is the refrain, "Stay in your lane." I wonder if some of this detachment, some of this sort of scrupulous fairness, some of this security camera observation might be a sort of an exercise of literary virtue, according to this view of things. Like you can't write with a big freight train of a narrative voice without sweeping people up and making assumptions about them. And which is not to say like stereotyping or doing ugly, lazy things with them, but you can't wear kid gloves with your characters in quite the same way. I wonder if some of that has to do with the preoccupations of the moment.
Or her own personal preoccupations, which are different than the preoccupations of the moment, because it seems like she isn't really that concerned about the preoccupations. Some of them, like you said, the idea of her sort of interest in the working class and the fact that she says that she can't call her, or why can't she call herself working class, because she works. Yeah. Is it also part fantasy? Like, does she wish that she was like the rich girl when she grew up, and that's why she's got these rich girl characters? I mean, who knows? I'm all about death of the author, but yeah. She is people like to draw parallels between her and her characters, which are definitely not always accurate. But then other times I do think a lot of the limitations of her characters are based on her own limitations, which ends up hurting the literature. Because if she has lived a very sheltered, very limited life, then that's all she knows. And that's all we're going to get.
It also, like, part of what I wondered about with these characters, though, is they have a lot of frustrations with the world around them. One of them is works for a politician. They all have these sort of, except for Felix, they all have like pretty strong political opinions and allegiances, but in terms of their daily life, the choices they make, like Joanna talks about, like part of the frustration with psychiatry right now is that it's not as developed as some other fields of medicine. And so there are a lot of really complex problems, but there's a limited number of solutions. Like you have a limited number of tools in your belt that you can use, and you can use them. You can be very informed when you use them, but there's only so many buttons you can press. And it feels like for these characters, the two buttons they can press are, am I going to spend time with this person? Am I going to fuck this person? And like, that's it. Like either you like left one party to go to another party and showed like what mattered to you by doing that, or you like got on a train and went to this other place, or you decided to have sex with this person or not. Like those seem to be the only two pills they can take, the only two actions that with which they can affect the world.
Yes.
And it's pretty interesting for all that, but it's not very encouraging. It's a little disheartening. Like, I don't know if this is, I understand why. I mean, it's like, it is very much a novel in which the characters feel powerless. Even like the very successful ones. Simon is also like quite successful for his age and is very well respected and has done well. But his experience of his daily life is that he makes no difference.
Yes.
And she says that, her novels don't matter and don't make a difference. And Eileen's little magazine doesn't make a difference. And Felix works in a fucking Amazon warehouse. And, he at least is performing a physical service for people, but it's certainly doesn't seem to, change the texture of life in any way. All they can do is fucking hang out. And yeah, maybe that's most. It's most of us.
Is it?
Well, I think in the world of people reading these books, among the people who read these books, I think, which is a slice, which is not most people. But I think it is easy to, let me put it this way. I think there are a lot of people who feel that way or who behave as if that's the case. Or the other button they push is posting online, which is
Yes.
actually not a real button, like which is not really doing a thing, I would say.
Or scrolling, just scrolling.
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah,
scrolling, not
yeah,
even being active and posting,
yeah,
just scrolling.
yeah. I think there are. Yeah, I think like that is. I mean, in that way, the book is, I think, very reflective of its moment. That there is a feeling in educated circles in the Western developed world of individual impotence, like an
Yeah.
inability to make any kind of difference in anything. I'm curious about this religion thing. I have a kind of a suspicion that there was a period of time when it became almost like required to be an atheist, like among like the educated Western set. Like it became sort of like a given that you were an atheist. And I think there are a lot of bad faith atheists. Like there are a lot of people who haven't really done that math and haven't like crunched what that means, but sort of claim that. And I don't know that it's like a big backlash, but I have started to hear among hip, young, educated people talk about religion that feels a little bit like the same thing. Like we're going to get a lot of bad faith pseudo-Christian, Marxist pseudo-Christians soon, in the same way that we've had a lot of bad faith, like pseudo-atheists, I think is my prediction. Because
I had no idea.
She certainly seems to be flirting with it throughout the book. And
But I thought that maybe she's flirting with it because, I mean, Ireland is such a nation that is religiously aligned, and historically is so much about it is based on religion. So I think that might be a huge thing that's going on there. And I think the atheism thing definitely has a lot to do with the fact that the millennials might, I mean, I don't know if Gen X in Ireland even grew up without religion. I think they would have all gone to church when they were little, and then they had to rebel against it. So maybe millennials are the first generation where their parents maybe said, "Oh, you don't have to go to church," and that was maybe they're the first generation who didn't have to go to church.
Right. I mean, what gives me pause about it here is that it doesn't seem to be the way she talks about religion here. It does not seem to be the struggle that one has when one is brought up in a religion and then departs from it. I mean, even like when
I agree.
Even when they're kids, they refer to Simon as like, oh, he goes to church even though his mom doesn't make him. That's weird.
Right.
So like from early on, that's how they feel about it. And she seems to be reaching sort of the end of something with her worldview in that passage I read earlier, which seems to be like, I don't know that I follow her logic or her theological conclusions, but it does seem to be that she feels that there's a need for some other something. There's even like there's a passage that reminded me a lot of actually Camus, who was I think he was like a Christian atheist in a lot of ways. Like he was really, really into Jesus, but despite not believing in God. She says, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe the number of people who have done seriously bad things is not insignificant. I mean, honestly, I think if every man who had ever behaved somewhat poorly in a sexual context dropped dead tomorrow, there would be like 11 men left alive. And it's not only men, it's women and two, and children, everyone. I suppose what I mean is, what if it's not only a small number of evil people who are out there waiting for their bad deeds to be exposed? What if it's all of us? And this seems to be, I'm assuming when it was written, this was the Me Too thing was a little more white hot at the moment. But even in other passages where she's not talking about sex, or Felix has a little bit of a shady past. He's done some things he's not proud of. But even in passages where she talks about like going to the convenience store, that both she and Eileen seem to have a very acute sense that their sort of passive participation in a first world consumer culture is a pretty malignant evil on the world. Like in that sense, there is a feeling of like a more profound even sense of original sin than like a lot of the like Robin DiAngelo nonsense. Like it does seem to be like there is a sense for them that they are all always already guilty, by participating, by being in the, like, by being born in one half of the world, more or less. And
that's also Catholic guilt.
Right. Well, no, right. No, but I think like that's the, it is, and that was, Camus, claim after the Holocaust was like, we all did it. We're all responsible. We're all in it. We're all on the hook for it. Which it seemed like my prediction is there's going to be a version of, there's going to be a Marxist flavored version of Christianity that comes into vogue, that will probably be as empty and bullshitty as like most people's hipster atheism and like as most people's Christianity in the part of the country where that's the done thing. So any other thoughts on Sally Rooney, or sex, or articles, or movies or books about her? I'm sure they're going to adapt all of these into movies or TV shows.
Yeah, Conversations with Friends is next. It's being adapted as we speak. And I'm sure the next one as well. But I do recommend Normal People, the series. It's brilliant.
So I got a copy of this book of yours, and this is a really curious book. So Waving, this is you published Restricted Movement last year, a year ago.
They were like really published like 2 months apart.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but you kind of spaced them for right. So Restricted Movement came out first, but was written all in a row very quickly after the fact. So Waving is in a different sense is your first book of poetry.
Waving is my first book of poetry. Okay. It is, always will be.
There are a few things that I think make this really, just on the face of it, a really unusual book of poetry, and a really unusual first book of poetry. One is that it's so short.
It's very short.
Right. These are poems. These represent, you said 17 years.
Pretty much.
Writing and publishing poems. And it is 43 pages of poems.
Yes, it's also a small font.
It's a small font, and it's a nice size. There's a lot of like white space. It's a pleasing little object, and there's a lot here. But it is, I mean, I think like that's a good size for a book of poems. Part of why it seems small is that there's this weird expectation that like every book of poems be like minimum 115 pages, which is insane. It's just way too much.
That's nuts.
It is, no, but like so many books of poems that come out now. I've seen a couple exceptions, but in many cases, even for like young poets, or like who had a book 4 years ago, it would be another 115, 100, in some cases even more than that. So I am.
But is it full of shit? Like, I mean, are those books full of shit?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think they're just not. I think there's a lack of selectivity at every level.
So yeah, I mean, that's not all the poems I wrote in 17 years.
That's what I'm saying.
There were loads of poems that aren't in there because they were shit.
Right. Well, I mean, and the joke some teacher told me in school was that the reason that a book of poems costs as much as a book of prose is that you're also paying for all the words that were left out.
Right.
Right. So no, I mean, I think like that's part of what I really admire about this, that it is, it's so selective. And I think like one of the consequences of like a loss of any even like generally recognized standard for quality in poetry is that there are people who don't do any good work publishing, and there are people who do good work not getting published. But like another one of the consequences, and probably a more common one, is that people who are fine just publish way too much of their stuff. That they're sending things out that are just like good enough. We're like, well, that was kind of had a little interesting something to it, rather than like, this is going to knock your socks off. I feel like unless you think that the poem you're sending out is going to knock someone's socks off, don't send it.
Yeah.
It's okay, and it's normal to write a lot of poems that have some cool stuff in them, but aren't quite there. And those poems you then don't send out.
Right. And you revise them. Right. There are so many of those poems that were in a drawer for years that I then like was like, oh my God, I finally figured out the ending to that poem after 10 years.
Right.
Like, I mean, that
That's
happens.
you can wait.
Yeah. You
You can
don't need to publish it when it's not finished yet.
no exactly. So it's really selective, and I mean that was my guess is that it's both. These are very revised poems, but they're also there were a lot of poems that just didn't make the cut
Yeah.
at whichever level of cutting, right, that you do as you go through these and you're sending them out to magazines and so forth. So it is a very slender book. It's also a book with no titles and no table of contents. And I'll say the tone of your email when I wrote you to make sure that I had not gotten like an arc that was weird in some way was such that I got the impression that like since restricted movement, even like you had been radicalized. You had a strong opinion about titles in poems. So I want to hear like give me your revolutionary take on poem titles.
I don't really have, I don't have a revolutionary take. It's something, I mean, I think every poet thinks about, and every poet has to deal with the fact that you've got to put a title on your poem, or you don't. Like Emily Dickinson didn't have to, Shakespeare didn't. Like, you don't have to title everything. So I think I just found that a lot of my titles were too explanatory or too distracting. I mean, I at a very, very early on in my career, my poetry writing career. So we're talking like, age 8 or 10. I realized that you can't have the title and the last line be the same. So that's obviously something that's a huge pet peeve. So I've always had this sort of.
You can't have the title and the last line be the same. I'm trying to think about
No.
it. I'm trying to think if I've seen that before.
It happens a lot.
Does it?
Okay, it happens a lot.
What is the effect when you do that? Because I can't think of a time I've read that.
But you give away the ending of your poem, which is the most important part of your poem. You give it away in your title.
Yeah. Okay.
The whole point of writing a poem is to get to that last line. And if you give me the last line in the title, I'm sorry, why was I reading this? You already told me the punchline. So I see it a lot, I think, because I am a poetry editor for a couple of magazines. So I think that's one of the reasons why I run into it a lot, is because I am dealing with people who, might not be, maybe haven't been writing for as long as I have. And so I see that a lot. I guess that's it. I also felt like that in this book, so I'd been sending out this manuscript for years with titles, with very different delineation on the page, everything looking very orderly and very sonnets and very strict. And then I just sort of let go of it all and just, I don't know what happened. I really don't. I think it wasn't an epiphany. It was more just like an illness. And I just sort of said, I want to get rid of all this stuff. I just want to open this up. I want people to savor each line. I don't want them to just read it like in a column. I just want more space. I need a lot more space between these words. So I started opening it up, and then I took out the titles. And I think I felt that the titles were a barrier between the poems, and a lot of the poems spoke to each other. And then once I took out the titles, even more poems spoke to each other. So I think I just felt so happy with the result of removing the titles. So there's
the effect I found was that I remembered there are like certain poems that are very self-contained and very sort of sharp-toothed, and I think of like on 22, the one about the I don't know what, like the boyfriend that someone else has a crush on.
Yeah.
That's like that's a poem that felt very much like it. I could remember that one standing apart, but often they would blend together into sort of a quality or a period or a stretch. There's a case where, like, I was looking at it again today, the poems on 12 and 13, and they're the one on the left is justified right, and the one on the right is justified left. So they kind of sit against each other, and I keep going back and forth on whether that's one poem or two, right? Like because it reads, one picks up where the other one leaves off, but you easily could feel like when you read like Shakespeare sonnets where one kind of begins to bleed into the next, but they have slightly different preoccupations. So there were a few times when paging through it, I wasn't sure if I had finished a poem or I was just continuing to the next line.
Great.
So yeah, it both makes you step back and look at the forest, but then it also brings your attention to the line rather than these sort of individual units. I realize, I think a part of why I really like titles is that I am lazy, and a title is a place where you can do less work and produce a bigger effect.
Yeah, right? It does a lot of work. Titles do a lot of work.
There are certainly, as I said, there's some of these that do stand apart and feel like they're really, really contained units. But then a lot of it also, I think, because it's, you have orthopedic shoes and, glass jars and, I don't know if you have, you refer to Nerf toys. And so it's a book that takes place in the modern world, but a lot of it feels sort of elemental. Like a lot of it is like bodies on sand with the ocean and like seaweed or like marine animals. But it feels like, particularly with the poems where the lines kind of float separate from one another on the page. I got the impression that I get when I read fragments from Sappho. There's a lot happening here. There's a whole world here, and I only have access to certain little moments within it. But there is a sense of a continuous landscape, from which all of these poems are taken. I mean, and probably the fact that it's called Waving and it has the water on the cover, it adds to that effect. But
that helps. So I didn't have to title it. I didn't have to title the poems. I just titled the book, and I was like, just think about the water. Here we go.
Yeah.
Here's your context.
Does every single person you show the book to ask you the Stevie Smith question?
No. Yes. No, not everyone. Actually 3 people.
Because the very first poem is about a body getting washed up on the shore.
Yeah.
It came to mind certainly, but it didn't.
Oh no, as it should, it 100% is there for a reason. Yep. I think it was Roger Lathbury who was the first person to ask me that. He said, "I don't know about the title."
I don't know about that. I think it's a good title
because it will make people think of the Stevie Smith poem, and I was like, perfect. That's part of it.
Would you read a poem or a page of lines that could be a poem or could be part of a poem?
I'll read a page of lines. Is there a page of lines you would like me to read?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say there are a lot of elegies and love elegies. I think that was what Marlowe called them.
As in breakup poem.
Yeah, maybe the one in 17, which is it's one of these poems where there's almost nothing to it. It's almost feels like, oh, you just kind of dash this off, but it's just enough to draw blood.
I'll read that. We can get together for these last few months, I say, but there's no chance I'll move across the world with you, you know. An expiration date. You find a job, I plan your bon voyage and help you pack. But then you send a text. I'd like to go to Anegada one last time before we leave. You've accidentally written we, as if we are a we, as if we are both leaving here together, as if this is something that we want to save. I let that we wash over me, then sink into it, as I'll sink into, once you're gone, the almost body temperature September sea.
That was my conversation with Traci O'Day, again, author of Waving, Restricted Movement, associate editor at Smartish Pace, and any number of other things. I will include links to all of her pertinent material online in the show notes. And I hope... Oh, Echo's settling in. Now that I'm about fucking done with this, she's ready to get comfortable. All right, well, thank you, as always, for listening. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.